what do we mean by biospheres? Yeah, it's comparatively simple. The biosphere are these four connected spheres. The atmosphere, the ecosphere, which is the living things, lithosphere and hydrosphere. So we have to define those four. You need to be familiar with them. But hydrosphere you did, I think, in year 8. It's just the water cycle. Lithosphere is going to be more challenging for you because we're going to look at things like phosphorus in rocks and carbon as well gets tied up into that. So the carbon, of course, is in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, but it's also in the lithosphere as fossil fuels. So it covers a couple of spheres. Ecosphere is, as I said, the living things, and of course carbon is in living things. We're carbon-based life forms. And then the hydrosphere is water. And guess what? Carbon dioxide messes with the hydrosphere as well in a very exotic way that could be very, very dangerous indeed. So let's have a look at things. Okay, so you should, by the end of this, be able to classify the biosphere as consisting of those four spheres: atmosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and of course the ecosphere. Be able to describe the examples in which human activity affects biodiversity. This human activity affecting biodiversity is a constant theme. So for each of those spheres, you should be, like a really simple one. Why don't I, after painting my house, drop paint down the drains? No. It's toxic. Come on, like literally, you get told don't empty the oil from your car and drop it down the drains of your house. Yes.
Paint the drain.
I'm not worried about the drain. Yes.
Is it going to the ocean?
Yeah, it's going to end up in a waterway, and it's a pollutant. And if everyone did that, it would obviously be a huge problem. So, it's humans' impact. We're part of this world that we live in, and I think you're familiar with the idea that we do impact these different spheres, okay? And the hydrosphere is a really obvious one because you've seen waterways where they get all cloudy and green with blue-green algae, which is actually bacteria, and it's all very confusing. But you know, you're not supposed to swim when there are algal blooms because there can be toxins associated with those, and that's from runoff, sometimes from piggeries or things like that. So you understand this idea of you know, sewerage isn't supposed to be just dropped in a river. You know, untreated sewage doesn't just get dropped into rivers for people downstream to enjoy. You know, we do impact our environment. Okay. Now, there's a few things. There are some key terms there. Okay. We're going to look at the atmosphere, the different layers. The ozone layer is a point of confusion for students. It has nothing to do with climate change. I'm going to say that now, and I'm going to say it about 10 times over the course of these 4 weeks. Don't confuse ozone and ozone layer with climate change. But the ozone layer is a really good example of a human impact where we've done something and we've changed the atmosphere in a certain way. Okay? The lithosphere, we need to look at the rock cycle a little bit, and the hydrosphere. We'll look at the CFCs as the impact on the ozone layer, and we'll also look at some other human impacts. So I'll keep, every time I point out a human impact, maybe mark it with a pink highlighter or something like that, because you should have in the back of your mind how are humans impacting each of these spheres. That's really important. This is actually the Earth here. No water, no life. 96.5% of the Earth, okay, is, you know, the mantle, the crust, mantle, outer core, inner core. It's just devoid of life. And then you've got water and no life for about 75 kilometres. Tiny, tiny, tiny little bits of water in the crust. They think that bacteria do live as far down as 5 kilometres into the crust, okay, which is pretty amazing. They know that there's a few species of bacteria that their metabolisms, they're almost inert for most of their lives. And so that bacterial cell may be the longest living organism on the planet. It may reproduce once every 1,000 years. So most of the time it just sits there. And when there are enough nutrients in the form of water and other nutrients, it'll just sort of fire up, make a copy, and then shut itself down again and just sit, you know. And so it's not really alive during most of that time. It just sits inertly. And then, of course, we have this thin little skin of 3 kilometres where we have water and life. So the Earth is, let's see, in diameter 12,756 kilometres, and that little habitable area is about 3 kilometres. It's more for other organisms, but for us it's not very much at all. From sea level up a few kilometres we can go, but we don't go very, very high above sea level as a general rule. Let's see. All habitats on Earth are located in what could be considered a life support zone, which extends from 10 kilometres above the surface down to about 5 kilometres below, which is just what I said before. But most of that area, that 15 kilometres, that's bacteria able to inhabit there, whereas multicellular life can't. You know, it just doesn't do it. Yes?
What lives 10 kilometres up?
Bacteria, just riding on dust, you know, doing their thing, moving around. Okay, this is a pretty hard concept for students. What is the biosphere? The life support system of our planet consists of the atmosphere, the lithosphere, and the hydrosphere. Okay, and we also say the ecosphere here, biota, but for in terms of the curriculum, we are most interested in atmosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and there's biota down there, living things. So we make up part of the sphere of living things, the biota down here. Includes organic compounds, carbohydrates, lipids and proteins. Now you also have the interactions between biotic and abiotic, biotic living and abiotic non-living. Obviously the water, H2O, is not alive. Living things do need water though, so they do interact with each other. Okay? And includes all of the Earth's ecosystems. So that is, when we say biosphere, we mean living and non-living things interacting. You've got that atmosphere, that hydrosphere, the lithosphere meaning rocks and soils and everything like that, and organisms themselves. Okay? Interactions include the cyclical movements of elements such as carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus. You cannot live without carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus. What is phosphorus used for in you?
DNA?
Yeah, it's in your DNA. Okay, and your phospholipid bilayer in your cell membrane. Okay, so or your cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. So things like, let's see, your nitrogen. What am I thinking of for nitrogen? I'll give you some examples later on. But those particular elements, carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus, are critical for life, but and for all life. But they are also found, you know, in the case of carbon, as in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, and in water as dissolved carbon dioxide, and in all living things just as carbon, and in the lithosphere as fossil fuels, where you can tie up carbon for tens or hundreds of millions of years. You know, so when the dinosaurs were rolling around, there was much more carbon in the atmosphere. It had 1,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. What are we at now?
406.
Yeah, about 406 parts per million of carbon dioxide. So some people say, you know, burning fossil fuels, not a problem. We're just returning carbon to the atmosphere. It used to be there. Very true. The oceans were 20 metres higher. That's also true. Okay, so it was a different world at that time. So yes, life can be sustained on the planet with 1,000 parts per million of carbon, but not in the way that we currently live our lives. You're looking at completely different weather systems, a very, very different environment, and of course much higher oceans. And given that most of our cities are on the ocean, then that's problematic. Right, here's just an example of some interactions. Don't worry about this too much. Certainly don't take this as a note. But look, here we go here. Okay, we've got, there's clouds, obviously precipitation, so we've got some components of the hydrosphere here. Here's sea ice, obviously the oceans, evaporation occurring, leading to precipitation. Here is heat radiation generated from the burning of fossil fuels. Where are our fossil fuels being mined? Normally one of these pictures will have a fossil. Oh yeah, don't forget volcanoes. Also a contributor to climate change, in the sense that they can throw up a tremendous amount of dust and debris which can cool things down, and they can release a lot of gases which can warm things up. So there's all of these different things, these different compounds. There's a lot of interaction between these spheres, okay, and between living and non-living things. Okay, that's a pretty big one. Okay, life on Earth only exists because of the atmosphere protecting us from the sun. I showed you a slide when we started astronomy where you have the sun's different types of radiation, including gamma, which is really damaging to DNA, and that's not able to penetrate the atmosphere. Yes?
You got the gases of the atmosphere in red. Do we have to know the
Yes, you do.
percentage?
You need to know those four. Nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and argon. So carbon dioxide only makes up a tiny proportion of the atmosphere. Nitrogen is the predominant gas in the atmosphere at 78%. So, you know, that is significant. Oxygen, 21%. Okay? Now let's see. This is a key point, that the atmosphere protects us from the sun, and it also provides us, we'll see this later on when we talk about temperature and the greenhouse effect. Because we have this atmosphere, the atmosphere traps heat energy from the sun, and without that atmosphere, the Earth would be effectively too cold to sustain life. Okay? Because, you know, Mars is only a little bit further away from the sun, but it's consistently -20 to -80 degrees. It's a good sized planet. It's a bit further out, but it doesn't have an atmosphere to trap heat from the sun. So that solar energy hits the planet and then just bounces back into space. Whereas our atmosphere traps a lot of that energy. So you do need to know about these four gases. Now, I do mention troposphere and stratosphere, but you're not expected to know those. The key layer that you should know something about is the ozone layer, okay, which is about 10 kilometres up, and it allows visible and infrared radiation from the sun through, but it absorbs UV radiation and protects the DNA of organisms from sun damage, from UV damage, okay. UV, X-ray and gamma are all ionising radiations. They all damage DNA. And if you have the wrong DNA damage, for example, a gene that is responsible for suppressing a cancer, so now it's not functioning, and the cell that can then become cancerous. Okay? So the ozone layer, that is its important job. 10 kilometres up, right there. Okay, it's not like lines. It doesn't just sort of start, you cross over it. Your build-up of ozone increases over time and then decreases. Okay, and so it starts from about 10 kilometres up into the 20 kilometres, and its job or its role in life is to prevent UV rays, or it prevents UV rays from as many of them from reaching the surface of the Earth, and they are very, very damaging. Now, let's see, do I need anything else there? Yeah, troposphere, weather occurs here, that's kind of interesting. The stratosphere is 40 kilometres thick, it's -30 degrees, and includes the ozone layer. As I said, those blue ones, you would not be examined on those. The atmosphere, you just need to know it's got a couple of really important jobs. One, it blocks damaging radiation from the sun, which is UV, X-rays, gamma. Two, you'll see this later, the atmosphere is needed for keeping the planet warm enough to sustain life. And of course, three, the atmosphere is where weather is occurring. You know, So in terms of rain, wind, things like that. Yes?
Crank out in the top right.
Yes, you need to know it. You do need to know it. Can I change? What? What are you guys writing?
Everything. Yeah, no, everything.
Atmosphere protects from sun.
Yeah.
I'm drawing that.
UV.
Ozone layer protects from UV. Oh, while you're doing that, I could mark the roll. That would be helpful. I'll give you a few seconds.
Jack always killed me.
Okay. I'll change now. Now, let's see. Okay, let's have a look at this. Here's a human impact. So, circle human impact. Now, you don't need to have this memorised, but what are chlorofluorocarbons? Cooling agents used in refrigerators and air conditioners. They're not supposed to be manufactured in the developed world anymore. As propellants in aerosols and as industrial solvents. So in the old days, every time you sprayed yourself with some deodorant or turned the air conditioner on, it was CFCs were involved. Okay, so they're one of three inventions of this one particular scientist I mentioned before. He put lead in petrol, which led to untold millions, if not billions, getting brain damage in one form or another. He put CFCs out there, and he then subsequently strangled himself with a system of pulleys that he had suspended over his bed because he had so much nervous damage from lead in fuel and dealing with leads in fuels. So now let's see. Here is a chlorofluorocarbon being released as an aerosol, and eventually it'll work its way up to the ozone layer, which is 10 to 20 kilometres up in the atmosphere. Now, from this diagram, ozone is O3. That is ozone. O3. And I've had you even draw that molecule before. Okay? Forms a little triangle. Now, can you, from that diagram, work out what is happening? Who wants to give me an interpretation of what you see is happening when ozone interacts with chlorofluorocarbons, a component of chlorofluorocarbons? Come on, someone other than Jack. Do I have to pick someone in the front row? Taddy's sweating bullets. It might be Taddy. Who will it be? Who will it be? Michaela is just like trying not to make eye contact. I'll make it a Jack.
It's converting ozone to oxygen and chlorine monoxide.
Yeah, there you go. So there's a simple chemical reaction going here when chlorine, so not even the whole thing, 1, 2, 3, okay? It's got 3 chlorine atoms attached in this molecule. When one chlorine interacts with an ozone, it produces oxygen, O2, and a chlorine monoxide, and then another reaction occurs between 2 of those, and you're going to get some oxygen, and the chlorine will be released, and it'll go through again. And it might do that 10,000 times. So for each chlorine atom that you release, and for every molecule of chlorofluorocarbon, there are 3, you might break down 10,000 ozone molecules. Okay, and that's how you destroy the ozone layer. So for you guys, you've always grown up with this. I've mentioned it before. You lost summer and you didn't even know it. Before you even knew summer, you lost it. When I was a kid growing up, you just ran around without your shirt on. If you went to a swimming pool, no one had a hat on. No one really used sunscreen. Okay, really, they just didn't. As a product, they didn't really exist. They put zinc on their noses because sometimes people would get like sunburned on their nose, and you just ran around in the sun and you got a bit brown. Okay, and now of course, you know, parents scream at you from the back door if you go outside if you don't have a hat as wide as your body. Yes.
Is there a way to make ozone?
Yeah, you do. We make it. It's a pollutant from cars, but the ozone that we make at ground level doesn't really reach the ozone layer. It just sticks at ground level, and it actually exacerbates global warming. So this is an example of humans affecting one of the spheres. Now, let's see. So UV in the stratosphere breaks down CFCs into chlorine, leading to ozone destruction, leading to more UV reaching the ground, leading to DNA damage, leading to an increase in cancers. Now, if I was feeling particularly grim, I'd get 4 out of 5 of you to stand up. So we'd say, well, 3 rows of people out of this classroom should stand up, and then I'd say, well, those 3 rows are likely to get cancer, and the 4th row is
Do it, make us all do it.
okay, you understand? So they say that 60 to 80% of Australians will get skin cancer because, do you know the ozone hole? What they talk about. This is really weird. You won't understand this because you don't have. If I imagine this, if I've got a cup of coffee and I drop some milk in there and I stir it, and the milk mixes. And you go, you can stir that as much as you like, Mr. Mads, it's just going to stay milky coffee. But what I'm getting you to conceptualise is, imagine I'm stirring, and every few months, a lack of milk accumulates in the centre of the cup. So I'm stirring, and all of a sudden, all the milk just gravitates to the outside, and so I've got a black hole of non-milkiness. And then I keep stirring, and then the milk mixes through again. Weird. That's what happens with ozone. A lack of ozone in Antarctica concentrates, and in the North Pole as well, but there's a lack of ozone that concentrates in Antarctica in winter. So the atmosphere is mixing around all the time, and ozone is mixing freely through the atmosphere, but because of changing weather patterns and temperatures, you get a lack of ozone in Antarctica, the ozone hole. And then, as the seasons change, that lack of ozone spreads out and crosses Australia during summer. And so we have, as a continent, a lack of even less ozone than other continents around the world. And so we're extremely susceptible to skin cancers as a population. So be conscious of that. Okay. Next one. Hydrosphere. All the waters of the earth on the surface, such as lakes and seas, and including water over the Earth's surface, such as clouds. So when you think of water, that's not the best example. Lakes, seas, including groundwater, it should include groundwater. There's an enormous amount of water trapped in soil. There's an enormous amount of water trapped in clouds. Okay, this is the hydrosphere. Now, you don't think of it in these terms, but yes, condensation, precipitation, there's evaporation going on. This is all year 8. You should be pretty familiar with this. This whole groundwater thing, water can sometimes sit in the ground for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, slowly percolating through and eventually making its way to the ocean. Or in ice and snow, hundreds of thousands of years, or if you leave it alone, millions of years. Okay, in the poles, where a snowflake falls and it gets buried and it gets compressed into ice, and it just keeps getting compressed and built up. And so you can end up where water, a particular water molecule, is locked up in ice and snow for, well, they've got ice cores down to 800,000 years. So that water, last time it was in a living thing, might have been 800,000 years ago. So there's this constant circulation of water. Transpiration is the hard one for students to remember. It's when you, through photosynthesis, 12 water goes in and 6 water goes out, okay, in the photosynthetic reaction, okay? And so you get water leaving the leaves of plants as part of photosynthesis. Very, very important as part of this cycle. The rest of this, sublimation, do you remember sublimation? When you go from a solid to a gas or a vapour without liquid in between. Okay, so you get the melting of snow, getting water vapour coming off that. So it's like the evaporation of a solid. Okay, can I change?
Well, that's a cramp card.
Yeah.
You should know that.
Like the hydrosphere, yeah.
You should know that. Biosphere. Now, here's an example of, here's an example of, and I mentioned this before, human impact. Now, this isn't climate change again, but this is a human impact. Now, caused by accidental runoff from land, washed into out of the atmosphere in rain, or deliberate dumping of toxic or industrial waste and untreated sewage in water systems. You can release a gas into the atmosphere and it causes something like acid rain, which contaminates waterways. Okay, so you get this idea of contamination. Now, this little picture here illustrates biomagnification. This yellow fish eats lots of little red fish. Now, the little red fish might pick up a bit of mercury from the environment. Mercury is a neurotoxin. It will cause significant nerve damage and death at high enough concentration. And that's the concentration in those little fish is not enough to kill them. They've got short lifespans. But the yellowfish has to eat a lot of them because most of what you eat goes to body heat if you're an exothermic. And so you don't get, you know this already from year 9, you only get, what's the 10% rule in biology?
It goes up by 10% concentration.
Yeah, the amount of energy between levels in a food web that get passed between levels is about 10%. The other 90% is lost. So I'm not, when I eat stuff, I'm not even close to being 100% efficient. I'm about 10% efficient. The rest is waste. So I have to eat quite a bit just to stay alive. And so of course the yellowfish eats lots of redfish. So its mercury levels per kilogram of body weight might be quite high. Maybe not quite enough to kill it. But along comes the bluefish, and it's eating a lot of yellowfish. So its mercury levels per kilogram of body weight might be significantly higher than the yellowfish. And then I eat the bluefish. And then I eat a lot of bluefish. And so mercury is a, mercury bioaccumulates in tissues. Once I take it into my body, I can't process it. Not all forms of mercury are like that. They're not all the same, but some of the nasty ones are. They'll accumulate in my body and build up and build up and build up over time. That's why you can't eat sharks. Okay, they're an apex predator. They're a large apex predator with a long lifespan. They don't seem to care about mercury very much. Okay, but you can't go to the fish and chip shop and have a shark steak from a 3-metre shark or a 6-metre shark. It's literally illegal to sell. Flake is shark meat, but small sharks. Okay, you don't get large apex predators. Okay, so this is what's happening here. Process in an ecosystem where you get higher concentrations of a chemical reached in organisms higher up the food chain. The higher up the food chain you get, the more concentrated the substance might be. DDT was a really, really effective pesticide, but it's for killing insects like mosquitoes, which nobody likes. But birds eat insects, and DDT accumulates in their tissues, and then the birds end up laying eggs where the shells are so soft that the bird just sitting on the nest is enough to break the eggs. And there was a book released called Silent Spring, where they were looking at this as a problem and saying, you're going to, if you keep using this product, you will kill a huge number of bird species. Okay, because of this. So DDT is still used in Africa, very carefully, because of with mosquitoes. Okay.